On today's World Insight, China's PLA Navy on a mission to rescue citizens from dangers and secure sea lanes from piracy and other threats. A look back at Chinese Navy milestones since its Gulf of Aden mission 13 years ago. And Senior Colonel Zhou Bo talks about combating piracy in the Gulf of Aden and security-related issues China faces today.
China has the largest number of ships in the world. Why? Because all the threats for China come from sea right now.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. 13 years ago, on December the 26th, 2008, the Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy, the PLAN, otherwise known as PLAN, began anti-piracy operation in the Gulf of Aden and waters of Somalia. Through years of Navy's rescue and humanitarian missions, China has gained more trust from other countries and has shown responsibility as a global player. Last week, the 39th Fleet from the Chinese Navy had just finished its 1,457th escort mission. Over the past 13 years, the Chinese Navy has escorted more than 6,000 ships, including more than 3,000 foreign vessels, and successfully rescued or aided more than 70 ships. Besides China, the US, Russia, Japan, Iran, and other countries also sent naval forces to escort ships in the Gulf of Aden. So what can we learn from this kind of international cooperation took place 13 years ago already? And what more can we look forward to now under the new realities? Let's ask our panelists. For more on China's Gulf of Aden escort mission and the multilateral cooperation in maintaining peace and security, we are joined Zhou Bo, Senior Fellow, Center for International Security and Strategy with Tsinghua University. In Tokyo, Lin Tianwai, Adjunct Senior Research Fellow with the East Asian Institute from National University of Singapore. In Moscow, Mark Sloboda on the phone, International Relations and Security Analyst. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Senior Colonel Zhou, start from you. 13 years ago, that scene was still vivid with us.
Yes, of course, I remember this so clearly because that was almost the change of my role. I just came back from working in Chinese embassy in Namibia, and then because of the pressing issue of counter-piracy, so I was suddenly given this job of coordinating PLA's counter-piracy efforts in the Gulf of Aden. So for that, I had to make almost once a trip to Bahrain, where international military coordination was held, and then I have to make 3 trips to UK in a year, and another 3 trips to UN to attend all these related meetings. So I'm always either on the flight or some people is on the way to the embassy to manage a visa for me.
Right. Well, Mr. Lim coming from Singapore, Mr. Sloboda coming from Russia, because there is enormous amount of cooperation among militaries around the world, a dozen countries participating.
Yes, indeed. This is the field of non-traditional security, NTS, and it is a common issue which some would call a global commons, where everyone has a stake in ensuring that the sea lanes are free from piracy. And coming from Southeast Asia, we do know that, for example, in our own backyard, the Straits of Malacca, many ASEAN countries have to cooperate amongst themselves and also with external powers to keep the very busy sea lanes in the Malacca Straits safe from piracy. Therefore, participating in piracy issues in the Gulf of Aden, off the coast of Somalia, or in the Panama Canal and other bottlenecks in the world is very meaningful for the maritime powers of Southeast Asia, especially half of the ASEAN countries are actually maritime nations, while the other half is continental nations.
Right. Mr. Sloboda, Gulf of Aden mission 13 years ago, the reason it's being remembered so well and vividly is because of the enormous amount of international cooperation. Russia participated as well.
This has been an ongoing mission for the last 13 years to combat piracy in this vital sea lane. However, there has been no real attempt to address the root causes of the political and economic dysfunction in Somalia and in the surrounding region that contribute and continue to fester this piracy, where the local people have little recourse but to engage in this activity because of the lack of other economic opportunities and the political and military state of affairs in their own country. But as much cooperation as there has been, this has also been a flashpoint for geopolitical tensions, because along with the participation of fleets from the West, we have also, of course, seen China, Russia, and many other countries. China has opened a logistics base to manage to help supply and continue their mission in Djibouti. The U.S., which has over 900 such bases, has reacted extremely negatively to the opening of this base, and they have also blocked thus far a Russian base from thus opening. So we see that in the pursuit of primacy and hegemony, even Chinese and Russian participation in protecting these sea lanes is being challenged by the U.S. and other Western powers who are very jealous of the situation.
Senior Colonel Zhou, we thought we started with the celebrating note. However, Mr. Sloboda already dragged us to the geopolitical realities. Your thoughts on this?
Well, he's talking about reality, but I believe the past can shed some light on how we should actually do in the future. Because the international cooperation in counterpiracy in the Gulf of Aden is a brilliant example of how countries could put aside the social differences, the sizes, whatsoever, to actually join each other in addressing the common threat. So this is such a good but rare example. Just the thing, how many countries involved? You mentioned about 1,000 countries. That is true, but at the height of the time, there are actually 25 countries involved. These include independent deployers like China, Russia, India, and also coalitions like EU, like NATO, like CMF, which is led by the United States. So all these countries were working together. They actually changed information on the same system, that is Mercury system, made by EU, that is a kind of encrypted platform for people to exchange information. This could hardly be imagined in peacetime. So this is a brilliant example, especially when we consider the competition in China and the United States is intensifying, but still, during President Xi and Biden's virtual meeting, both leaders vowed not to have a conflict. And President Biden even suggests to have some common sense guardrails. So yes, we talk about guardrails, how to avoid incidents or accidents, but we should look at the past. That is more important. That is an example of cooperation.
Mr. Lim, your thoughts?
Well, in international relations, there are two schools of thought, constructivism and functionalism. And the cooperation at the Gulf of Aden does demonstrate the potential for many countries to cooperate in patrols and non-traditional maritime security. In addition to that, I would like to add that there are also economic incentives for such patrols to take place. Because whenever piracy happens, the insurance for the shipping lanes will go up. And this will hurt ultimately the consumers of the goods that are passing through the sea lanes. And certainly much of the products that are coming from the Middle East, East Africa, products like petroleum, does come to Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia. A large percentage of it is needed for energy industries, and also the manufactured products from East Asia goes the other way around. So there are economic incentives for many countries to work together, to cooperate as a form of functionalism. And certainly, I think many ASEAN countries, which are dependent on open trading regimes and sea lanes, will definitely work with all parties concerned because this is a global commons.
Right.
And I think the coronavirus has also taught us the danger of supply chain disruption.
Senior Colonel Zhou, earlier Mr. Lim has provided quite some inspiration as to how we can go from here. But geopolitics are realities. Mr. Sloboda earlier argued about that. So what about China? I mean, at least right now, U.S. is looking at China as a competitor. And is the earlier kinds of cooperation still possible today?
If you talk about China-U.S. relationship, basically that could be characterized in three words. One is cooperation, another is competition, the third is confrontation. Nobody wants confrontation, but if we do not want that, we must make sure that at least cooperation prevails over competition. So in current Biden administration's policy of having extreme competition but not conflict, it's difficult because if you listen to some people who say our relationship is extreme competition, then that sounds dangerous because it sounds that it's not so far away from conflict. So that's why exactly we should just review the lessons learned from Gulf of Aden to show that, hey, you see, we do have a lot of areas of cooperation. But people now still talk about, say, DPRK issue, like Afghan issue, and climate change. But in military field, I think the top priority is to avoid miscalculation and conflict.
Mr. Lim, one of the things that countries in the ASEAN region refuse is to refuse to stand in the team, so-called of China or the team of the U.S. Because ASEAN has been patrolling the central neutrality for a long time. But Mr. Lim, so how do you see international cooperation possibilities like that? When parties involved raise the possibility, how will countries like Singapore, like your country, and others in the region react to that?
Well, the whole concept of ASEAN centrality means that ASEAN wants to engage all major powers, all of them. And to do so, one of the models that ASEAN is applying, particularly in its own backyard, is the Code of Conduct, which it is pursuing with China. Now, the ultimate prevention or goal that the ASEAN wants to avoid is actually the situation that Colonel Zhou has mentioned just now, which is unintended consequences and accidents. And the whole point of the COC is to prevent accidents at sea. And if that is possible, perhaps it can be used as a model for others to follow.
Mr. Sloboda, now on the so-called global common good, for example, peacekeeping, how much do you see Russia will be able to work with others, and how much constructive steps Russia will take in that direction?
Despite attempts and claims of isolation of Russia by the West, we see that the West is not the world, and that their dictates about who should and should not have relations with other countries does not always have as much strength as they would like it to. At the same hand, we have seen even Western allies, Turkey and Germany, sanctioned or threatened with sanctions simply for conducting business with Russia by the United States and their allies. This is extremely dangerous, of course, to free trade and international relations as a whole. It's a very dangerous precedent, but we don't see this incidence decreasing. It is increasing. And the result of that is there will be increasing pressure, not by Russia, not by China, but by the United States and its allies against neutral declarations by the countries of ASEAN and others to choose side as geopolitical tensions increase. I hope they can maintain that neutrality. I have questions about how the economic incentives will play up against the economic disincentives of U.S. sanctions applied to those countries if they take that next step.
All right. Zhou Bo, Lin Tanwai, Mark Slobodka. What a pleasure. Thank you so much. And this is World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Senior Colonel Zhou Bo talks about combating piracy in the Gulf of Aden and security-related issues China faces today. Next, come back. This is World Insight with me, Tian Wei. China's military power has always been of interest to the international community. Is it a source of anxiety or stability? China is now the second largest contributor to the upkeep of UN peacekeeping forces. China also provides the most peacekeeping troops among the permanent UN Security Council members. As China gains more experience in security, it grows into a global player and is increasingly mediating among countries in keeping stability. That's what China believes. Amid geopolitical uncertainties, though, what are the challenges and opportunities for China in that direction? I'm joined once again by Zhou Bo, a senior fellow from the Center for International Security and Strategy with Tsinghua University, who was the former director of the Center for Security Cooperation of the Chinese Military of National Defense. Now, earlier, your conversation with your colleagues around the world about the Gulf of Aden peacekeeping mission, anti-piracy to be exact, 13 years ago. But there were some air of skepticism about what is going to happen today, Senior Colonel Zhou.
Now, of course, it's such an interesting comparison because that is almost a unique example of how countries of different systems, of different sizes, of different strengths might come together for joint the task. We actually are looking for such opportunities, whether we could still repeat such kind of cooperation. But actually, there are places for us to repeat such a cooperation. For example, in the Sulu Sea, between the Philippines and Malaysia, where piracy is also rampant. So for us to address the same problem in a different place, we could actually use this kind of international cooperation if these countries would want us to do so, because President Duterte from time to time would invite the Chinese Navy or Chinese Coast Guard to participate. But for such kind of things to happen, it's primarily the obligations of the littoral state. They have to make efforts, and they have to invite us.
I remember 13 years ago, the priorities of Chinese development is not necessarily security, but in recent years, China add in its agenda, one of the biggest goals is security together with development. So this, in a way, will have a huge impact on the goals of Chinese Navy, China's maritime growth and development. What exactly is going to be its significance? What are we seeing now?
The precondition for China's reform and opening up is actually a peaceful international environment. And we, at that time, concluded, by and large, we won't have another world war. So we can become dedicated to economic development. But after decades fast speed development, we are now still focused on economic development. But other people's views toward you have actually changed because they thought, like, for example, the United States thought that you might, during the whole course, eventually become one of us. But it didn't happen because this was made very clear by former Vice President Pence in his Hardison Institute speech. Because he made it very clear that the United States would expect China to become a free China. So China hasn't changed much because China never lied to this country. China always maintained China is a socialist country. So China never said that we are going to become one of you. But these countries actually harbor a kind of wishes. And these wishes didn't turn true, so they were frustrated. They were panicking. So their attitude toward China has very much changed. And so we'll see what we're seeing now, the ever-intensifying competition between China and the United States, and the somewhat ambivalent feelings of European countries towards China.
So Senior Colonel Zhou, if I understand right, you are arguing fundamentally, there is a huge difference of what others accuse China in terms of its naval development vis-a-vis what China considers as its priority. You are saying China, looking at the word of security, is mainly about keeping a secure environment in its own territory and neighborhoods, rather than using security as a goal toward the others. Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, your question actually has combined so many different aspects. If we are talking about the Chinese, if we are talking about the Chinese Navy, then it is a different issue. China's national issue would involve so many aspects, including Chinese Navy. But let's, because we have just to talk about our counter-piracy efforts in the Gulf of Aden, let's talk about Chinese Navy. Because compared with Chinese Army, which actually fought to establish People's Republic China, and the Chinese Air Force, which at least fought against the American Air Force during Korean War, the Chinese Navy was the least experienced in real combat. Of course, it has won in the so-called Shisha combat or Piracy Islands combat. But at that time, even the 4 Chinese naval ships combined was smaller even than the largest ship of the South Vietnam Navy. Nowadays, China has the largest number of ships in the world. And what makes that to happen? Because the Chinese Navy, why? Because all the threats for China come from sea right now, be it in Taiwan Strait, be it in South China Sea, or be it elsewhere in the Indian Ocean, because China rely heavily on the sea lanes of Indian Ocean. So all the threats come from sea. So that is why China got to develop a large navy, and that is why the Chinese Navy is developing so fast. And China's Navy is not only for self-defense, it also got to protect the overseas interests of China and show the great international responsibilities that are associated with the Navy of a great power.
What about building the military base in the international water, Mr. Zhou? There were a lot of alert, it seems, that in the Western press about China's intention.
Well, so far, we only had one logistics supply station in Djibouti. What you are referring to is the so-called string of pearl theory, or what I would call fallacy, because it has been there for decades. And until now, the international world see only one logistics supply station in Djibouti. Yes, there are rumors spreading, but you see, if you have a military base overseas, it is not something that you can hide, even if you want, because it would be very big, and there are so many international coverages. So, but sometimes people got a mistake. Why? Because PLA has a lot of interaction with the foreign armed forces, with about the armed forces about 150 countries. So we have a lot of interaction. Sometimes these interactions was mistaken as China's efforts of staying there permanently. That is wrong.
There's another interesting story developing at the same time. The U.S. Pentagon has been testing what they call the laser weapon system in the Gulf of Aden and surrounding areas to, in a way, send messages, this is according to the Pentagon, to China and Russia. Now, what do you make of the latest development?
Well, this is a kind of test which happened before. Yes, I'm aware of that, but this is not news, because for them to maturize this kind of laser weapon system, they have to practice from time to time. And if it happened in the Gulf of Aden, that means actually the Fifth Fleet conducted it. But this is nothing new. I would not say that because according to the media, of course, this kind of weapons system would be useful, and they would hypothetically talk about the potential adversary of China and Russia. But there is no direct linkage between these two.
So you're saying this is message is rather a propaganda coming from the Pentagon?
I would believe the primary purpose is to have this kind of test. But at the same time, of course, it could be read differently as sending signals to different countries. Because if this kind of technology is mature in the hands of the United States, that could become a deterrent to other countries.
Right. Another point, Senior Colonel Zhou, you mentioned in the earlier discussion with your international colleagues, that is about the guardrails between China and the United States. The issue of Taiwan, for example, has been very much of the focal point, and how to avoid a military conflict has become such a big issue between China and the U.S., and also China and some of the U.S. allies. So, Senior Colonel Zhou, how is China preparing that since that virtual meeting between the Chinese president and U.S. president? How does China see that could be avoided?
No, it is not resolved. And that is why, even at the head of states level, they would mention it. And I believe they have not talked about the details, but they have showed a common determination not to let a conflict happen. I think that is the actually sense of the conversation. So the question is, what is guardrail? You see, because people read the same thing in different light. For example, I even remember our last conversation. Where could we have this kind of accidents or incident happen most easily? That, of course, in the South China Sea, right? Then the question is, the U.S. Navy would not take China's water as China's water. They would take it as international water. So we have an absolute opposite opinions towards an issue, because it makes a huge difference. These kind of conversations are almost like the conversation between two deaths. It's very difficult to resolve. Right. I don't know what other measures could be established to resolve this kind of problem, which are at the strategic level. It's not about a technical level.
13 years ago, you worked for the Chinese Ministry of Defense. You were flying in the air around the world in order to make that happen, the Gulf of Aden, anti-piracy international cooperation. The world's changed so much since then. Now, in retrospect, I really wonder, on a personal basis, what are you thinking today?
Well, I worked 30 years ago in the military, and I actually worked until the end of last year. So, but that was very much personal. I've been kind of piracy for me, because I was an Air Force officer, but I was so much involved in naval affairs, going so frequently to foreign countries for international coordination. But I would consider it a rare example of how countries can cooperate. And that means it is possible cooperation. Sometimes it is possible. And there's no need for us to go down this road of entering into a new Cold War. Cold War is gone. Many people discuss whether this is a new Cold War. Okay. But I think because of such cooperation and because the nature of our relationship is different, we should avoid, getting into a war.
And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight. Check out our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for watching.